Can you guys hear me? Sound check. Can you hear us from this computer? Okay, we can't hear you. I don't know if your audio is connected yet, but just a mic check.
Yeah, we have the room muted, and we're gonna unmute it right as the meeting starts.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yep.
first, then we'll be online as we get started. So everybody in the room is tracking. So hi, everybody. Welcome to the Clear Creek Superfund meeting. My name is Charles Van Otten. I'm with the EPA. I'm a community involvement coordinator with the EPA. I'm just going to make introductions for the EPA as well as CDPHE. So it's joining us in the room. We have Kyle Sandor from CDPHE. He is the project manager for this site for CDPHE. And then also joining us online from CDPHE is Laura Dixon, and she's the community involvement director for the CDPHE. So she's helping with us run the meeting online. From the EPA side, myself, Charles, also joining us is Valerie Dornbos. She is a community involvement coordinator as well with the EPA. And then we have the project manager, Angela Zachman, who is the project manager for the EPA. Also joining us online virtually is the regional administrator, Casey Becker. And she wanted to make some opening remarks. So Casey, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Charles. Hi, everyone. I'm Casey Becker. I'm the regional administrator for EPA Region 8. Region 8 is 6 states. It's Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and 28 tribal nations. So that means I oversee all of EPA's activities in those 6 states. And Superfund is just one of the programs. We also have Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, the list goes on. So all the different departments that work on those at EPA that work on those activities in these 6 states, I oversee. And getting involved and learning more about Superfund has been one of the most interesting and important parts of this job. And familiar with the Superfund sites in Clear Creek just from when I was a state representative representing House District 13, which included Clear Creek and Gilpin counties. But at that time, there wasn't a lot of activity that the state was undertaking on these Superfund sites. So this is a state-led site. So it's really, because the state is leading it, we have a more of a backseat role, but it's really important to me to see that the project move forward. So I wanted to participate in this community meeting so I can learn about it, see where the community is, how you guys are feeling, and what the comments are, and just make sure that EPA's engaged and listening. So just wanted to introduce myself, and I'll be here for most but not all of the meeting. And I will turn it back over to Charles. Thanks.
Thanks, Casey. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the presentation itself. We are going to have a question and answer session at the end that will answer any questions you have. So if you want to submit any questions online, we'll get to them into the chat. We'll get to them at the end as well. And then here in the room, we'll get to your questions at the end. So if you could just hold questions to the end, that'd be really greatly appreciated. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kyle so we can get the process started.
Awesome. Thanks, Charles. And thanks everyone for joining us today, both virtually and in the room. And I just wanted to say a special thanks to the Gilpin County, our Clear Creek County folks, Megan and Beth, for helping set up this room and allowing us to present to you guys today. So we kind of did go through introductions real quick, but just to reiterate, my name's Kyle Sandor. I am the project manager with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Sitting right next to me is Angela Zachman. She's the project manager for EPA. Charles introduced the folks also on this slide. One thing that we wanted to reiterate, and Casey highlighted, is that this is a state lead site, and so kind of the state is in the lead and EPA is support, but we both work collaboratively together. Angela and I working hand in hand on these projects, are in constant communication. So if you guys do have a concern, you can reach out to myself or Angela, and we'll make sure that we communicate it to each other. With that, Angela.
Sure. And I was just going to step over and kind of take a step back and talk about what is a Superfund site. Superfund began in like the 1970s. There was a lot of public interest in some of the waste dumps. Love Canal and the Valley of Drums were two. And in response, Congress passed the Comprehensive Environmental Response and Compensation Liability Act, which is CERCLA. And informally, we refer to CERCLA as the Superfund. So those are the two terms that we'll kind of use through this presentation and where they come from. So the CERCLA process, they generally include lands that are highly contaminated, such as things like manufacturing facilities, processing plants, landfills, and mining sites, a lot like what Central City is. So with that, though, so the Central City Superfund site was established and put on the NPL, or the National Priorities List, in the early 80s. And it was actually turned over and became a state-led site in the 90s. So.
Thanks, Angela. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the background of the site. And I do see some familiar faces in the room, so this may be a review for some of those folks. But just wanted to give a brief rundown of the history of the site. As Angela mentioned, the site's been around since the early 80s. It was originally established to address acid mine drainages and mine waste piles from five tunnels and mine waste piles across the site, and had later was expanded to include the Clear Creek watershed, specifically where there were historical mining impacts with our OU3. After OU3, we recognized that there were specific impacts to the North Fork of Clear Creek. And so another operable unit 4 was established to address those concerns. And where we are today is with the establishment of our new operable unit 5, which is looking to address residential mining impacts. The site was the location of both small scale and large scale mining activities across the entire watershed. There, if you guys live in the area, you know that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of these small mining impacts, and that's what we are seeking to address as part of the site. As I mentioned, it is the entire Clear Creek watershed. On this map, you can see, our area of where we want to focus our efforts. There are several municipalities located throughout the site, including Central City, Black Hawk, Idaho Springs, Georgetown, Silver Plume, and Empire. Most of our efforts across the site have been to address surface water quality through capping of mine waste piles, removal of mine waste that are in tributaries or in the creeks themselves, along with the construction of 2 water treatment plants, the Argo and most recently the North Fork Clear Creek water treatment plant. Both of those 2 water treatment plants are currently operated by the state, by contractors that we work with to do the day-to-day operations at those facilities. So our operable unit 5, which is the focus of today's meeting and the focus of our most recent work, stemmed from our 2017 5-year review, where there was recommendations for additional sampling in residential areas. It was based on several factors, including increased development and population within these residential areas of the site, along with, and most importantly, or also important, is our better understanding of the impacts of heavy metals on human health, and specifically lead. We did assessments for that 5-year review in both 2015 and 2018, which kind of ground truth our assumptions that there could be these impacts, and which ultimately led to this expanded sampling effort. Our new operable unit 5 is looking to address residential mine waste. And we are currently in the process of our investigation and characterization of that mine waste. We call it the remedial investigation and feasibility study. And then essentially that is just our process to look and see what is there and evaluate our options to deal with it. Additionally, we're conducting a human health risk assessment, which will allow us to establish some site-specific cleanup goals and really evaluate the impacts that are happening here at the site using site data. One other thing I wanted to highlight is that we have focused efforts to communicate to potential residential developers on how to best develop within the site area. We do have some resources available on the CDPHE's website, specifically for developers that are looking on how they could engage with the agencies ahead of their development. And so, as I was talking, we are in the kind of the throes of our new OU5. We have started the remedial investigation feasibility study. We have draft final versions of those reports submitted to Angela and I right now, and we are currently working through that review. What this slide shows is kind of the general Superfund process. So as you can see, we're kind of at the beginning stages of this new operable unit. Once we finalize our remedial investigation and feasibility study, we'll be moving towards the proposed plan, which is what highlights the results of our characterization efforts, and also presents what our cleanup options are going to be. And what we're anticipating is an interim record of decision and a proposed plan that will address kind of the piles that have the highest concentrations with the closest proximity to residential areas. And then ultimately we'll have a final ROD and final cleanup goals that address the rest of the spectrum of sites that we've investigated. So I just wanted to get a little bit more into the remedial investigation part of the project. We started sampling in 2022 and 2023. CDPHE hired a consultant, CDM Smith, to assist with this effort. And the effort was extensive. We had originally targeted 100 waste piles to sample, but that ultimately equated to hundreds of potential property owners to request access for it due to the bisected nature of mining claims and where these waste piles are located. While we did target 100 waste piles to sample as part of this effort, we ultimately sampled 93, which we saw as a huge success given some of those challenges with access and you're trying to reach out to folks. That sampling happened in both Clear Creek and Gilpin counties. And this chart shows the number of samples that we collected between the 2022 and 2023 sampling years.
So if I could just clarify, that's the total number, right?
So that's the total number. And these aren't number of the number of waste piles sampled. These are so that top number is the number of samples that we collected in those 93 waste piles. And then additional breakdown of the samples for that 93. This next slide shows a breakdown of the waste piles that were sampled by general area across the site. I would say that there is I believe it was approximately I think 40 or so piles in the Gilpin County area and about 50 or so in the Clear Creek area. And this map just shows where those waste piles in general that we sampled were. You can see that they are biased towards where there are residential properties in the site. And we will be making an interactive interactive map available for folks upon finalization of our remedial investigation, feasibility study, and human health risk assessment. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about the feasibility study. The feasibility study is, the process where we develop, screen, and evaluate our remedial action alternatives, essentially our cleanup options. As we see it right now, or, as the stage of the investigation that we're in, we've kind of come up with 3 general alternatives, which include removal, capping of material, and in-place treatment. And frankly, a combination of all 3 of those are potential given a site-by-site evaluation. When mine waste is left in place, the agencies do use what are called institutional controls to ensure the long-term protectiveness of the work that was completed. And these institutional controls can take many forms, but they can include county and city ordinances, environmental covenants, and restrictive notices. The institutional control language regarding, I'm sorry, I just need to. The institutional control often include language regarding future development of the property and the appropriate steps to take to develop it safely. With that being said, we do have a few slides that are focused on our risk assessment and the risk assessment process. And I'm going to be turning it over to EPA toxicologist Caitlin Leverich for these slides.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Great. Sorry we can't be there in person. We're in training in DC today. But yeah, we're a part of the risk assessment team with CDPHE and their contractor CDM Smith. And we kind of just wanted to dive into what is going back before the feasibility study. What is the human health risk assessment look like and how that's a part of the remedial investigation. So overall, the goal of the Human Health Risk Assessment, or the HHRA, as you might see it referred to, is to determine if chemical contaminants can create a health risk to humans and the environment, and that helps inform the risk management decisions and potentially the cleanup decisions that are made in this process. So taking a step back even further, what is risk? So it's really just a chance or probability that a contaminant might cause harmful effects to human health or the environment in a very defined situation. And as you probably know, pretty much anything can be risky, right? But how we're trying to quantify risk is how toxic or potent is a contaminant, how much is a person exposed to a contaminant, and also risk is influenced by how sensitive a certain person might be to an effective exposure. Next slide, please. So this is a brief overview of the risk assessment process. So there's 2 arms to it. So one is hazard identification of chemicals. And so what health effects might a chemical cause? And so these are pretty well known. EPA and other researchers have really spent lots of years and research looking at these health effects. And from there, we can look at how different doses affect human health and start to quantify exactly how potent these chemicals are. And then on the other arm is what we're more focused on in the risk assessment at the site. So that's pretty much how exposed are people. So how much chemical is actually in the environment, in the soil, and mostly in this case, and how much contact does the person actually have with the environment. There can be something very toxic, but if there's no risk of exposure, then there's not a high risk. So we take both of these arms and do a lot of modeling and calculations to come up with risk estimates for each pile on the site. And overall, that will lead to risk management decisions. Next slide, please. So something you'll hear a lot about this site that we want to introduce you to is the notion of bioavailability. So it's a pretty complex topic, it sounds like, but it's more basic to understand than you might think. So even though there might be a chemical in the environment, in this case in the soil, not all of that is going to be absorbed by your body. So in this case, you can see this picture with both black and white particles that a person's being exposed to, in this case by swallowing or ingestion. And that's a really common way that people are interacting with contaminated soil in our exposure scenarios. So why does it matter is that this contaminated soil contains both arsenic or lead or other chemicals that have different bioavailabilities. So the bioavailable forms of the chemical will be absorbed by the body, whereas the not bioavailable forms, such as the black forms shown here, will be excreted and leave the body. So how do we actually use this information? So it helps us refine our risk assessment goals and achieve cleanup levels based on how much is actually accessible to the human body. Next slide, please. So also as part of the risk assessment, you'll see us refer to two different kinds of levels of toxicants or chemicals. So one, in our first steps of human health risk assessment, we use very generic, what we are calling screening levels. So these are levels of chemicals that have been developed by states, EPA. We are pretty much using the most conservative levels out there, and we use them as a first step of our remedial process. So this is not considering any site-specific conditions. And basically, if the values, the concentrations of chemicals found on site exceed these screening levels, then we target them for further investigation later on in our site. And then later on in the development process, as we move forward towards a record of decision, we develop cleanup levels. And these are very site specific, still based on very sound science and very conservative toxicity values, but we're actually incorporating bioavailability and site specific geochemistry that might be at the site that will influence how much chemical we're actually going to be exposed to. And so again, these are determined at the final steps of the remedial process. And if these are exceeded, then action will be taken on the site. And next slide. And I'm going to hand this back over to Kyle, just some basic steps that we recommend to prevent your exposure, potential exposure to chemicals, and especially dirt. Thanks.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, so we wanted to include this slide because we have.
We live in dirt. I know.
Yeah, so we wanted to include these slides because we have seen at other sites that providing this level of education is important to help minimize your exposure to the metals impacted soil. So things that we recommend are washing your fruits and veggies if you have an outdoor garden, wiping your shoes, and try to keep your dog clean if they're going in and out of the house. Mopping and wiping down dust collection surfaces, washing your kids' toys, and then also making sure that they're washing their hands and feet after playing outside. We do have a dirt alert fact sheet that's part of the packets that we brought today, and for the folks that are online, they can find it at the CDPHE Clear Creek website that talks a little bit more about these best practices and has some additional resources for you to follow up on. And lastly, we just wanted to show some folks that maybe aren't aware of what these mining piles may look like. Just a few examples. They do have some typical characteristics. They'll often be what we call a stained color, so either a yellow, a white, or red, somewhere in that color range, and also sparsely or having no vegetation at all are kind of the indicators of these mine waste piles. And with that, we wanted to open up the opportunity for your questions to the group. And I know we have some folks online, so Laura, if you could help with letting me know when we have questions in the chat, that would be great. And so for the folks in the room, questions?
Since we're just talking about the dirt, so if we don't live near a site.
I'm not logged in. Sorry, we have an echo. We're trying to figure out for everybody.
Let me stop sharing. We should be good. I have it muted on my end.
Okay, so because of all the wind, we have a lot of wind up here and everything, so it can just blow everywhere.
Right.
Basically, it can be anywhere at any time.
Yeah, so we do realize that the wind blown contaminants can be an issue. One of the recommendations that we make is to minimize impacts to the pile. Just when the piles are disturbed, they are more likely to release, sediment either through like rain and runoff events or during strong winds. It is a little technical, but what ends up happening on a lot of these piles is they form a hard crust with precipitates from the minerals that are in these piles. And so that it can act as a barrier to some of those erosion issues. But yeah, those are concerns that we have is from wind and rain runoff.
Hi, last time you mentioned that you'd be sending letters out to homeowners where you had hits of areas of concern. Have those gone out yet?
Yeah, the letters have gone out and we've gotten feedback that they have been starting to be received by those property owners. I think actually the Clear Creek County was one of those, and they were able to share with us that they received their letter today.
Kyle, did you send, was it 27 you sent out in Gilpin?
So I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head, but I can pull that up for you real quickly. So in the Gilpin area, so it was six piles sampled in Blackhawk, 26 piles sampled in Central City, and 24 piles sampled in Russell Gulch.
We do have a couple questions online too, FYI.
Excellent. Let me see if I can pull up the chat.
We have Margaret with her hand up. Do you want me to facilitate online people?
Yes, if you could. We'll work on doing that on our end.
Margaret, go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, my husband, John Bauer, is here with me, and he's gonna ask the questions, if that's okay.
Hi, yes. Hi, my name's John Bauer, and like Margaret said, her husband, I have a couple of questions. I hope we have time to get to those. It sounds to me, based on the material presented, is that the screening tests have been conducted so far, and cleanup recommendations will be to follow on that. Has any bioavailability data been obtained on any of the screenings? That's my first question at this point yet.
Yeah, so we collected bioavailability data as part of our sampling effort. We collected 224 in vitro bioavailability samples out of the 93 piles that we sampled.
Okay, and when it comes to bioavailability, are we talking about, let's take, for example, arsenic. Arsenic may form some chelates or be bound up in some other organic material. Are you able to distinguish one chelate from another in order to predict whether or not it would be absorbed either orally?
Oh, I think you were cut off a little bit there, but we did collect some data to try to make those correlations. We collected 30 or conducted 30 electron microscope sample analysis to try to correlate the geologic speciation of the samples that we collected to the analytical data that we collected. So there is that a level of evaluation happening.
Yes, and some of the samples that were analyzed were, I think you determined the pH of an aqueous paste, I think it was. And I'm very curious about how one can conclude that a level of a certain metal, say lead or arsenate, could be determined simply from a pH measurement.
Can I answer that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so we did two different follow-up tests other than just measuring for chemical concentration. One is that soil paste pH, and that is not to measure a specific chemical. That is more to model what happens when the pile is encountering water. So if there's rain on it, pretty much how acidic will the pile form the water around. And the more acidic it is, the more likely that the metals will actually leach from the pile into the rainwater or groundwater if it were to touch it. But we are not looking at specific metals for that. And then we have a separate analysis that we do in the lab. So we'll take a soil sample, we'll mix it with a really strong acid. So it's to mimic the acid found in your stomach. And then we'll take that and run it through our analysis to look at what specific chemicals and what concentrations they leach from that soil sample into that stomach acid pretty much. So it's a way to mimic biology. And then that way we have specific chemicals and how much they are absorbed into that acid-like substance.
So you have done some lab analysis to follow those pH measurements, and then following on that, looked specifically at some of a particular metal of interest. And in that way, you've determined the concentration of that analyte in that particular sample that was taken in the field.
Yep, and we run it through something called a mass spectrometer. And so that way we are able to pick out, for this case, we were specifically looking for lead and arsenic because those are our top metals of concern. And especially they've been shown to vary a lot in bioavailability. So that's what we tested for in that acid. Yep.
Yes, I get it. I'm a retired veterinarian and a clinical and a professor emeritus at Texas A&M. We live here in Colorado.
If you ever want to nerd out, let us know.
An interesting project, of course, and certainly I want to learn more and hear more about it as things go on.
Great to have you.
I think I should let other people ask questions.
Feel free to send us an email if you have anything follow up though. We're happy to answer.
Yeah. So I'll mute.
All right, Caitlin, I think I figured out how to unmute. So I will go ahead and unmute John Maselnik.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, let me introduce myself. I'm John Maslanik, VP and Secretary of TBM Land Conservancy. We had authorized 4 of our load claims for you to test on, which we have about 250 acres that straddle and are at the top of Virginia Canyon. So my question is pretty general, and I know it's in early stages, but how do you envision, I guess, the record of decision or the process getting to the record of decision to integrate with, say, zoning, building plans, and county building requirements, and what do you think is a time frame for your activities to be I guess integrated with the county, particularly Clear Creek County?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the focus of our interim rod is going to be to do the cleanup work on the piles that have the highest concentrations and are closest to residences, we likely would envision our final rod addressing some of the concerns that you're raising. We don't have a timeline for that final rod, but are happy to engage with developers one-on-one to help answer some of those questions. So we could definitely schedule a meeting with you offline to talk through some of those concerns in more detail.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yep, looks like we have one more hand up, Dan Lauder. And I will unmute you now.
Thank you. Yeah, Dan DeLauder. I have a consulting firm, Reflect Engineering, and I've done some work in the basin over the years. One entity, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. So one entity, Central Clear Creek Sanitation District, is pretty interested in the water quality aspect. And I was curious if you expect any of this work to further that water quality. And I guess if not, sort of what's the plan for going back to the protectiveness determinations on, I think it's OU3 that was more focused on water quality. Just kind of what the path forward is for that piece. And if you do expect any improvements in water quality from some of these pile cleanups.
Perfect. So we did look at water quality across the site during our last 5-year review. We did recognize that there are some segments within the watershed that we aren't meeting our water standards. And so we do have a plan in place to update our surface water sampling plan and evaluate those areas where we may need to do additional work. The target of our, I'm just gonna,
Yeah, I think.
the target of our OU5 work really is focused on residential impacts. So while there may be benefits to surface water quality through our OU5 work, it truly isn't the focus. But again, we do kind of have a process that we're looking into to look at surface water a little bit more closely and address any areas that we need to remaining in the site.
Thanks for that.
Yep. And looks like we have a Shelby with a question. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hey, Kyle, this is actually not Shelby. It's Susan Borden with Blue Ore Environmental. I apologize. I'm actually out of town at my niece's house and I'm using her computer.
Understood. Okay.
So I just want to just as an outset, I want to let you know that I'm not calling on behalf of Block 57. I'm actually calling on the behalf of a couple of other clients of mine who are wondering about a couple of different questions, and I just wanted to potentially rapid fire a couple of questions that they had for me that I couldn't answer.
Sure.
The number one thing is the definition of OU5 and its purpose, and therefore potentially its what sites that it can encompass. So we keep talking about mine waste piles on residential property, but in your slideshow you mentioned it was more mine impact. What exactly, if somebody wanted to buy a piece of property or develop a piece of property in the 400 square mile watershed, what do people have to be concerned about? Are we now, has OU5 now defaulted to mine scarred lands? And if so, it might be helpful to have a definition of that, or is OU5 still mine waste piles on residential property?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And the focus of our initial work has been to look at our mine waste piles because we recognize them as having the highest potential risk. But for OU5, we are going to be looking at residential impacts due to mining. And so there is the potential as we move forward through our cleanup process that we start looking at areas outside of mine waste piles, but we did start our, focus with those areas that we thought to have the highest risk.
So will you be publishing a definition of mine impacted land at any time so that people know going forward that they might be, I hate to use this word, but my apologies, I can't think of anything else, ensnared by the OU5 purpose definition? I just have a couple of clients that don't want to be part of that, and they are a little concerned that mine piles have evolved to mine impacted.
Yeah, and that's a very valid concern. And what we would hope to do is in our record of decision documents, define what the site is, what the final OU5 is. And so through our interim record of decision and that final record of decision, there should be clarity, for those folks that are looking for it.
Okay. So a little bit of a hypothetical here, because again, I've got sellers that want to sell and buyers that want to buy. When it comes to these mine waste piles that have already been sampled and found to have concentrations of lead that exceed the risk standards, and I'm not quite sure which, I don't know, Caitlin, if we've established a THQ of 1 or 0.1 on those kinds of things, but regardless, should a developer or frankly at this point a private landowner want to buy a land that potentially in the future could be considered mine scarred and therefore subject to OU5, would EPA consider the part of the property that has been mine scarred or has a mine pile on it as subject to the OU5 remedies, or would it be the entire property?
So one of the things that we're going to do during the cleanup process is delineate the impacts to these mine waste piles or mine impacted lands. Right now, we have superficial data collected to characterize these piles, but we did not delineate the nature and extent of the pile's impacts, and that'll be happening as we go through the cleanup process. We envision a process in which we do additional characterization work prior to the cleanup to fully establish what the aerial impact of that pile or mining impacted area would be.
So would it be correct to report back to my clients that potentially, and I'm emphasizing potentially here, that an entire property could become subject to the ROD if there's impact beyond the mine waste pile?
Yeah, I want to be careful about speaking in
I understand.
hypotheticals,
Sure.
but given a scenario where the parcel is entirely covered by a mine waste pile, then I guess the answer would be yes. But again, I think that would be something that we'd want to talk about on a case-by-case basis. And the other thing I want to kind of highlight is we do have some fact sheets out there for folks that are looking to develop properties and some specific guidance for commercial versus residential. And so, we'd be happy to, talk offline about.
Well, this is actually for people who want to buy, they're actually not developers. They're people who want to buy single family homes, and their concern is that, well, let me ask you this. Has EPA Region 8 made a decision yet, or have they started talking about the policy protections that EPA Washington, D.C. have provided to single family homeowners? I've looked over the fact sheet several times, and there doesn't seem to be a definitive answer as to whether or not EPA Region 8 will abide by or agree to the policy decisions in terms of single family, no more than 4 unit residential development. Has EPA made a decision on that? Have they just started to discuss that?
So, Angela, do you want
To be honest with you, Susan, I'd have to get back with you on that. I do not have the answer for you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Kyle, do you have?
The only other thing I would say is that there is policy with EPA regarding enforcement discretion for residential property owners. And over the history of the site, we have never required a residential property owner to do cleanup or pay for cleanup at the site. And, there are very specific circumstances where we could, if they were doing illegal mining or, something like that. But in general, and again, we don't want to, say definitively yes or no, but in general, we would want to follow that EPA enforcement discretion policy and not enforce against, residential property owners.
Do you anticipate putting that in writing? Because again, I'm actually speaking on the behalf of some people who want to, well, a couple of different parties that are interested in buying land for no more than 4-unit residential property. They are concerned that they will become responsible parties under OU5. So do you anticipate making a decision on that and publishing that so that they can get, they can move forward? I don't know where in the process there's going to be a decision made on that.
Jamie, I saw you popped on if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, sure.
Jamie.
Hey, this is Jamie Miller. I'm the Region 8 EPA Remedial Branch Manager. So I oversee all of the project managers in Region 8. So Casey is my boss's boss. So I just wanted to chime in and say, Susan, I think for right now where we are, the best approach is to have those folks reach out to us one-on-one. I think once we get into that record of decision, we'll have more definitive ideas about what that's going to look like, and also we can be clearer with our language regarding that. I think we're just still so early in that characterization phase, but we are happy to work with people while we're in this characterization phase on those questions. So I would just say, Susan, I mean, you can always reach out to us one-on-one or have your clients reach out to us one-on-one, and that goes for everybody else in the room as well. I just think we aren't at the point where we can make that sort of definitive statement, but we will take that back to our Office of Regional Counsel, our attorneys here at Region 8, and prime that question up for them.
Right. So Jamie, thank you for that. So what I'm looking for, I was just going to be point blank here. What I've had, non-Block 57 clients ask me is when those decisions. I mean, they're when two things. When the definition of mine impacted, because it sounds like we're going from mine piles to mine impacted, which is fine, but when does EPA Region 8, that could probably happen before the ROD is established, when that definition will be promulgated, if you will, and when EPA Region 8 anticipates providing, publicly stating whether or not they're going to have that regulatory discretion after, going after regulatory, single family homes / no greater than 4-unit homes. And the third thing, if you're taking down notes on what I'm getting asked by potential clients, is, if you're going to buy a property with a mine scarred land, it's one thing to buy or try to redevelop whether you're a commercial developer or a single family homeowner. It's one thing to develop a piece of land that has a couple of mine piles on it, under which OU5, the mine waste pile, has been determined to be part of the Superfund site, as opposed to the entire parcel. I'm just going to be honest with you, those are the 3 questions I keep getting that I just don't have answers for.
Okay. Yeah, I think if you want to also maybe follow up with that in an email to Kyle and Angela, I think that'd be super helpful, because us understanding the universe of those questions will be helpful for everybody. So we appreciate you bringing that up.
Fair enough. We'll do.
Yeah. Thanks, Susan.
I'm just going to interrupt for just a second. Susan, I just want to ask you, just repeat what Jamie said. If you could put your questions in writing and send them to the state, but also send them to us. I think you probably have either Jamie or Charles's emails. I think that would be helpful.
Is that Caitlin speaking? I'm not sure.
That was
This is Casey Becker.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I will do that. May I have just one more question? And I know I'm taking a lot of everybody's time here, but in regards to the VCUP issue, is property that is not and I know that we're going to work on the mine scarred land definition. So putting that aside, are properties that are not mine scarred, and I'm just going to use the traditional technical term for that, are they available for VCUP availability, tax credits, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and that's a great question. In general, the brownfields dollars are still eligible for contaminants that are not related to the site. So essentially contaminants that aren't metals and soil related. So if you have a property that has, asbestos, issues or lead-based paint, or, we've recently found out that there's mercury in gym floors, those sorts of issues, we 100% can, assist with brownfields funding. The one limiting factor is that metals and soil contamination that we can't address.
So just, I don't want to take up everybody's time, but one of the questions I'll be putting in writing, just to let everybody know, is given that lead is a naturally occurring pollutant, contaminant concentration or whatever in that area, my specific question is, I get that we're going to be, of the definition of mine impacted land is going to be evolving. But I just want to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. Are you saying that a non-mine scarred land that has naturally occurring levels of lead, because we're in the Rocky Mountains, are they or are they not available for VCUP funding? And if we don't have a decision on that, that's fine too. I just need to report back.
Yeah, that is honestly a great question that I think that I would need to touch base with the VCUP folks with and the EPA brownfields folks. Because honestly, that I don't think that's a scenario that we've come across yet. So let's bring that question back to that group and I'll try to get an answer to you as quickly as possible.
Jennifer popped up too.
Yep, I can actually maybe provide some insight onto that today. So hi, I'm Jennifer Talbot. I'm the remediation program manager at CDPHE. So similar to Jamie, I oversee all the Superfund sites in Colorado, as well as brownfields, VCUP, and federal facilities. And so I think the question that I would have here is, we're not going to require you to clean up background. So if the site is, has lead that's naturally occurring at levels that are consistent with background, like there wouldn't be a requirement there to clean up. So I don't know that you would have a VCUP issue with that scenario.
No, but you might have other contaminants not related to mine impact.
Right, but you wouldn't be exempt from coming into the VCUP program because you had background lead. Like what we're looking for the Superfund site is if you have elevated levels of lead that are beyond what we see for background. So it wouldn't, if it's not a mine impacted area that only has lead as background but has other contaminants, you wouldn't be automatically ineligible for the VCUP program because of the Superfund site.
Okay, so just let me restate that. I think I understand what you're saying, but just because Kyle mentioned more on the lines of asbestos and lead in buildings and those kinds of things. What I'm hearing you saying is that non-mine scarred lands that may have other contaminants that exceed all those standards that we all know about, those sites would be available for VCUP. Even if
they'd still have to go through the eligibility process to make sure that it is. So I'm not going to give you this blanket statement that any site would be, but if it met the eligibility requirements, so it didn't fall within the mine impacted definition of the Superfund site, and you had other contaminants that you were looking at, you could be eligible for VCUP.
Fair enough. That's what I wanted to know. Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple questions.
You guys, there's one question in the chat that's been there for a while from David Gallagher.
Thank you. Let me pull that up right now.
I'm happy to answer it as well. So it was, how far in feet in general is it hazardous for a house to be from a pile? So overall, hazard and risk are determined by exposure. So really when we're estimating exposure to a mine waste pile, most of it is soil, like incidental soil ingestion, usually from dermal contact. So if you're not in direct contact with the pile, as you go away from the pile, it will get much less hazardous. We haven't done specific studies yet on how, if any fate or transport has transported the chemicals further out from the pile. If it looks undisturbed, then it's probably very low risk as you get away from the pile. But that, again, is something what Kyle mentioned when will be determined during cleanup. And Kyle, you can add on to that if you want.
No, I think you kind of nailed it. Yeah, I don't have much to add on that point. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I work with Clear Creek and Gilpin doing economic development. And I just wanted to clarify because I think there's been some just miscommunication or misunderstandings, I guess I should say, over the last, I guess we've been kind of looking at this for the last year and a half. And so I just wanted to throw out some of the kind of general rumors that have been going around and see if we can kind of get rid of. So one is the entire county is being designated as a Superfund site. All of our home values are going to tank. We won't be able to sell our homes because we're going to have to say we live on in a Superfund site. So that's one thing that's been of concern that has come up multiple times to me. The other is, yes, this just deals with residential properties right now, but commercial will be next. And what does that mean for development? I know, housing is really important, affordable housing in our county. And so I know some developments, it appears to have been slowed down from this process. That said, the health and safety of our residents is what's most important here. And so I really appreciate what you're doing and the work that you're doing. But I think because you're in the process and we're like, give us answers now, and you just can't, there's been a lot of assumptions that have been made. And so the more messaging or communication that people like myself can have to distribute, or language that I can provide to developers, both residential developers and commercial, would be really helpful just to ease some of those concerns. And then Susan asked the one about brownfields, which I was wondering, because that was another rumor, is that nothing in Clear Creek qualified for brownfields anymore because we're now a Superfund site, this umbrella Superfund site. So I think that's all of the things that have been thrown around.
I think I tracked them, but just let me know if I don't hit on all of them. So the first thing that we want to communicate to folks, and are honestly looking for ways that we can do it better. So if you're aware of a channel or a group or a way that we can get this message out, please let us know. We have Charles here.
More than happy if you want to set up and we're going to reach out to as we kind of get more information, but to realtor groups in the area and things of that nature. But if you have contacts into that, or you want to help us set something up, we're happy to come to a group or a room, to have one-on-one discussions or virtually, whatever works, to help have these conversations. So yeah, please reach out with that. And then I'll turn it over to Kyle for, I think your first question was in relation to.
Yeah, so the Superfund site kind of designation. And so the one thing that we want to make clear to folks is it's not the whole Gilpin and Clear Creek County. It's really where there were those mining impacts within the area. We know it's a lot of the county area, and so we acknowledge that. But that is what the Superfund site is. And the one thing that we encourage folks, especially commercial development, is it's really important to do your due diligence prior to property purchase, both a phase 1 and potentially a phase 2 environmental assessment. The phase 1 in particular is what's going to help you identify if those historical mining impacts are there. And if the phase 1 comes back saying that there aren't those impacts, then you don't have to do the follow-up engagement with us and kind of look to go through those other processes. And the other important thing about doing that phase 1 assessment, it does give you liability protection under CERCLA, and it can be really important as they move through that process. We do have a fact sheet on the CDPHE Clear Creek website that's specific to developers that kind of has some of that information. And we're also strongly encouraging those types of developments to reach out directly to either myself or Angela. So that got through the first question. What were some of the other things that?
I was going to add on to that too, that EPA also has like a developers redevelopment page with a bunch of resources on there. And I think one of them is like a 12 questions to ask if you're buying a Superfund, purchasing a property. So it's a good resource too. Sorry, Kyle, go ahead.
Yep.
Yeah, and so, and again, this sounds silly to say, but there's been kind of this sense of panic of what's going to happen to our real estate market here in the county with this kind of tarnished.
Yeah, we certainly understand that, that concern. One of the things that we do like to message is, a property that's been cleaned up at the end of the day is likely going to, hold more value than one that hasn't. And so, while we do understand that there are concerns about, property values and decreased value because of the Superfund site, what we've seen, at other sites is that, the cleanup ultimately leads to increased tourism and, increased, moving to the community. And so we see it as a net benefit, even though, it can be scary when you're at the stage of the cleanup hasn't happened yet. You don't know what's going to happen. So, I hope that answers helps answer the question. And we do have some resources that we could, help point folks to for that redevelopment.
May I ask one more question? I'm sorry, this is Susan again. So on following up on that question.
Wait, so Susan, there's other people that have their hands
my
up.
apologies.
So
Sure.
I just want to make sure we're giving everybody the opportunity to ask questions, if you don't mind.
Fair enough.
Sorry, I know Margaret has had her hand up for a while as well.
And whenever you get a moment.
Yeah. I think you're next. I think we answered Margaret's question.
Yeah.
Did we answer your question?
Yes, that was helpful.
Okay.
And I think what I'll do is reach out one-on-one and then I can get the fact sheets and all of that and
That'd be
Certainly.
awesome. Yeah.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, good to see you.
See you too.
I want to thank you for all the time you spent with Clear Creek and City of Idaho Springs on this.
Definitely.
I decided to ask questions because
Sorry, we're still getting some folks here.
I'm a little alarmed and I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly some of your responses to Shelley's questions. I also want to ask that for Clear Creek and for Gilpin County, that those questions that are submitted in writing and answered in writing, those answers are delivered to us as well.
Certainly.
I think I might have heard you, I'm going to use different words than you used. I think I might have heard you recommend that if somebody's thinking about buying a residential property inside the Superfund study area, they should conduct a tier 1.
No, so that's specifically for commercial development. I'm sorry.
The
Yeah.
profile is residential, right?
Yeah.
So can you clarify that, because that does cause me alarm. If what we're talking about is a period of time where if you're talking about buying a piece of property in Clear Creek County or Gilpin County in the study area, and you think someday you might put a garage on there and you don't do a tier 1 in the beginning, can you help me understand? Am I misunderstanding this? Or if you're thinking about buying a property right now, what should you do to protect yourself?
No, that's a really good question. And so, while we don't recommend, necessarily doing a phase 1 for a residential property purchase, it does have a lot of value for commercial. For residential, we do have that EPA enforcement discretion policy. And again, we have never required a residential property owner to do cleanup or pay for cleanup at the site. And we still don't envision that moving forward. And so what I would recommend to folks that are looking to buy a residential property is, again, kind of they can reach out to Angela and I directly. You give us some details about the property. I've done a little bit of research for a few folks that have been looking to buy a residential property to see if there is a mine waste pile on their property. Is there not one? Have we sampled it as part of OU5, and kind of give them some direction, based on that, that one-on-one. So that would be my, best, recommendation, at least right now where we are in the process.
And so I think that does kind of validate in a real estate market, when people have a lot of properties that they could buy in a lot of counties and a lot of places. I really worry about how prospective new neighbors of mine might respond to this conversation we just had. And so I really want to urge you to try to get some clarity sooner than later. And I want to, the second piece of this that has me kind of alarmed right now is, I think properly described as scope creep, going from waste piles to mine impacts. The way that most of the properties, at least in the unincorporated areas, are derived, become private property is by mining activity. Almost every one of them has some kind of a test hole, something, right? They don't necessarily have like a yellow or gray mill or mine waste pile. But I think what I heard is that the scope could actually include pretty much every unincorporated property. And that if you're thinking about buying one and doing something with it, even if you think you might want a garage 15 years down the line, you might be looking at a different county. And so like, I just want to express some alarm and really urge you to provide clarity about the scope and about how your enforcement priorities on properties are going to look like soon, like as soon as you can.
I will say, sorry, just to add on to what our commissioner said, you know, it's gotten as extreme as people have said, oh gosh, I'm not even gonna be able to plant a garden or dig a foundation, or if I'm trying to like, yeah, like people are just like, we can't even dig a hole in our backyard. I mean, it's gotten that extreme as far as kind of the rumors. And I guess speaking frankly, some of the frustration has been, I've reached out to CDPHE and said, oh, reach out to the EPA. And then the EPA says, reach out to CDPHE. And we haven't been able to get any answers for your benefit, honestly, to be able to provide the communication to our residents who are like, what the heck is happening here? So, and I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around, and I think Susan kind of alluded to this as well, is pile versus impact, and we need to know we need to know what that means and what the communication is supposed to be,
right?
Because we talk with, and you know, I obviously work mostly with commercial developers, but a lot of residential developers wanting to build housing here, and we just don't know what to tell them, and there's just this kind of sense of panic.
No, those are all valid concerns. And before I get into answering, I think Jamie wanted to hop in. So
well,
ahead,
Kyle, I was going to let you give it. You go ahead, and then I'll chime in. I didn't want to steal your thunder.
Okay. So we recognize that, you know, these concerns about, you know, development and, you know, potentially, you know, buying in the Superfund site, and we want to be, you know, as transparent as possible. One of the things that we are, you know, working on, and this is based on feedback from our meeting in Idaho Springs a few weeks ago, is coordinating a biannual meeting with essentially, you know, elected officials, you know, county and city representatives. There's a little bit of red tape that I have to go through to be able to, yeah, have those sort of meetings, and I'm working on getting those approvals. And I have, he's on vacation today, but we have CDPHE's communication specialist Brandon Ingersoll kind of has that meeting kind of queued up and ready to start coordinating as soon as we get, you know, the appropriate approvals. And our hope is to, you know, by having those meetings, try to alleviate some of these, you know, concerns and rumors, and so that way you guys are informed and can try to you know, inform the community. And you know, and I realize that doesn't answer the question about, you know, site definition and scope creep, but we're hoping through those communications we can kind of, you know, work through some of those issues and, you know, address them. Jamie, did you have anything else you wanted to?
Yes, I will chime in with my thought. I just wanted to kind of point out that when we're looking at what we're calling things in OU5, you know, the term mine scarred versus mining impacted materials, those terms really, I don't want to sound dismissive, and I'm not being dismissive, but you know, the term we call it doesn't matter so much as like the land use and the concentrations of those metals that we're seeing in that material. So I just want to clarify for folks that when we're talking about OU5, we're really looking at those areas where people are being exposed to metals concentrations that are above levels that have been deemed protective for human health. So I don't know if that helps kind of just clarify why we are looking at these residential properties, but just wanted to chime in with that to see if that helps clarify a little bit.
Thanks, Jamie. Got a few more questions.
I wanted to find out what the impact on the wells, like, are you digging down to deep levels near these sites for, I know we're all in a shell system and the water just flows and then it goes into our wells and then we pull it out. How deep do you guys dig? Or are you just doing the Superfund site, like where the top is, or?
So the focus for OU5 will be those specific piles, delineating them and, figuring out how far their impacts or, mine impacted lands. We have historically looked at groundwater, as part of the site, but we, through this, kind of OU5 process, there have been concerns about groundwater brought to our attention. So this is something that we're going to be revisiting and looking at a little bit more closely for the site as we move forward.
Just to clarify, in OU5.
Well, in the study area, the larger site.
So that could be an OU6 or.
We do have a OU that addressed water historically, and so it would fall under that one. Back there.
So the question that's a little bit different than this. So we are in the Dumont Downhill Lawson area, and off-road vehicle recreational stuff has gotten very popular on the mine zones. They're doing their wheelies and the spring waters go right through that and then it goes to our properties.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just, as residents, this sounds like something the crust would, be taken off and then all of that arsenic lead or whatever is coming down. And we all live on mill sites as it is. So is this something that's part of this or no?
So it could potentially be, earlier this year, EPA issued a updated lead policy guidance that kind of expanded the universe of sites that we can consider residential, and recreational uses is one of those kind of parts of the expanded definition. So there is a potential that we could, evaluate those types of piles. I don't want to make any commitments in this meeting, but I think that's a really valid concern to bring to our attention.
Maybe educate people that it's not such a great idea to go up there and be.
No, that's a really good idea. I know we have focused our efforts on, providing people on education on, what to do when you live around these piles, but we have not focused any efforts to that specific use. So that's definitely something that we'll take back and, look at a little bit more closely. Go ahead.
So Kyle, there's a couple of questions in the chat too.
Okay, we'll get this one and then I'll pop it back over to the chat.
And the meeting last year, I don't remember when it was. You talked, CDM Smith hadn't started the sampling, but the one question I'd asked then was, who do I specifically ask to get the list of the 582 piles with their exact coordinates? And then the list of the 92 that were sampled? I mean, is that just asking this meeting, or is that a Freedom of Information Request Act? Because that's not on the website.
Yeah. So that information will be available in our finalized RIFS and HHRA.
Yeah, I'd like those coordinates now though, because I don't anticipate that being for like another year and a half from now. So what is the process to get that data?
So if you wanted that data now, you could certainly make a Colorado Open Records Request Act or request, and we could work through that process.
So that's the only way I can get it right now.
Right now, yeah.
Okay, and then as a geophysicist, I'm one of the authors of the American Society of Civil Engineers infrastructure report for Colorado on the hazardous waste stuff. So who are the primary contacts for the state and EPA when I want to dig into these topics in more detail to make sure that they're properly discussed in the infrastructure report?
That would be Angela and I. I think it would be the best contact, and then if we need to loop in other folks, we can as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to remember too, like Kyle was saying with that proposed plan, that'll go out for public comment. And that's an opportunity for everybody here to read and make comments. And those comments, we have to address those comments.
And, the one thing that we, want to reiterate to folks is while they, are intended to be focused on OU5, they can be not OU5 related. So, things like groundwater, other concerns, you make those comments in the proposed plan because, that is one of the ways that, we're made aware of them and you can address them.
I mean, just a general comment, I think the website that exists for all this does a really poor job of explaining conceptually what OU1, OU2, OU5 are and how they relate to each other and what they mean to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So like a general question I would have is, since the meeting last year, what have you accomplished in that time period? And what is the relevance of whatever you've accomplished to the people who live here?
Yeah, so what we've accomplished is essentially collecting all of the data that we needed to inform our RI or the remedial investigation. And then with that data, we worked on our human health risk assessment, which will allow us to come up with site-specific cleanup levels. And then also we are working on that feasibility study that I talked about, which is where we determine what our cleanup options are. So that's kind of the work that we've done and are moving to finalize here very shortly.
What's very shortly?
That's a great question. We're targeting this fall.
I just want to let everybody know. So the meeting was scheduled to end at 7. We'll continue answering questions. However, if somebody has to leave or drop off and they haven't had a chance to ask the question and they have to go, please feel free to email myself or Kyle or Angela, and we'll get those questions, those answers back to you for sure.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm just going to run through those real quick. First question is, can residents within the study site request their property be tested at this point or at any time in the future? And that is a process that we're going to look to establish with the interim record of decision. We don't have that set up yet, but that is something that we want to be able to offer to folks that that can voluntarily have their property tested. The next question is, are there more piles on residential property that you will request to test in the future? Right now, we don't have any current plans to request additional access for sampling, but that may change as we move forward through the process. 2 more questions. Any chance OU5 will sample more piles in the future? Sorry, that was kind of a repeat. And the answer will be yes. And again, by that voluntary process likely. And the last question that we have online, can you tell us what the plan and timeframe will be for moving forward from the initial screening phase to more advanced testing than the proposed remediation? And I think we did touch on this a little bit earlier, but what our plan is to do is to delineate the mining impacts during our cleanup process. So we'll do a design build cleanup process, which will allow us to do additional characterization prior to the final cleanup on a site-by-site basis. Oh, one more popped up. Can you please schedule an in-person meeting in Gilpin County so our residents can attend? So far, both meetings have been in Clear Creek. And that's something that we are definitely willing to do. We did have some initial meetings in Gilpin at the kickoff of this process, but are more than willing to meet with the Gilpin County folks and are always, looking for suggestions on, how to best engage. So if there's any, if any specific suggestions, please let us know. Otherwise, we can work with our communications folks to set up a meeting like that. And there's a few more in the room. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. So I'm Commissioner Hollingsworth from Gilpin.
Good to see you again.
We were just at a meeting recently and gave us some great information. So Gilpin's taking an approach of trying to get as much information out to our residents as possible. So it's helpful when you're feeding us information on our website. So if the person asking hasn't visited the county website, they'll find information there. And then I'm glad to hear that you have specific things for realtors, because we wanted to get that out to the realtors so that they are informing people steps to take or considerations if they're buying or selling a property. And then our public health is just starting the blood testing for lead, and they really want to reach out to children in particular. And I know that Clear Creek has been doing it as well through public health. So it's something that someone could take that step anyway to identify if they're affected, and then do some action, to help beef up their health, prevent it. So it's really going to be a process. And I know that you did tell us that more definitive study information will be available later in the fall. And so we want to use that as a springing point to get out more information to residents. And I heard Commissioner Marlin here, has I'm more worried about the real estate market in Clear Creek because it's more widespread. In Gilpin, it's pretty concentrated in the south part near Central City, Blackhawk, in that area. So people can look in the mid county and North County. No, I'm just joshing now. But anyway. OU5 is not throughout Gilpin, and that there's information available. Adding to the information as we get it, and would be happy to have a community event for that, because not everyone listens to the commissioners' meetings.
Yeah.
You know that.
Yeah, the one other thing I want to let folks know about is we are planning on having another public engagement meeting in August. With the same similar setup as we did this time, where we did one meeting in Idaho Springs, one up here. And then I think we could certainly add a Gilpin County specific meeting to that rotation as well. Do you have some?
For you.
It's because I'm holding my letter that says the lead at like 100 feet outside my windows is 200 times the rate. So I'm gonna ask you to speculate wildly, and I promise to not hold you to it.
Okay.
If we were thinking about from now until the time at which I would expect someone with shovels to show up in my backyard, what timeline would you associate to that?
That's a great question. And not knowing your specific details, we're essentially planning on starting that cleanup work next construction season. So spring of next year is when we're planning on starting that. Again, without knowing exactly where you're at, I don't know where you would fall on that timeline, but given the number of impacts that we are likely going to address as part of the site, we see this as a multi-year process. So just want to be very upfront is that, you could be on the front end or you could be on the back end of that process, but that's currently what we kind of envision.
And I absolutely applaud, from a timeline perspective, like worst first, and like starting to tackle what you've learned, like in that order of priority and in the timeframe ahead of the final rod, like all of those things. So thank you.
Yeah, no, definitely appreciate that. And again, we want to reiterate that even in lieu of immediate cleanup steps, those best practices that you can find that their alert fact sheet and that we mentioned during the presentation, we've found them to be very effective in kind of minimizing some of these exposure risks. I work on the California Gulch Superfund site up in Leadville, and one of the major components to our residential lead program is education. And we've seen in a number of cases over the last several years that just through education alone, we're able to bring down a child's or a nursing mother's elevated blood lead by providing that education and doing a little bit of follow up to see what potential sources they're interacting with. So it is it's not the answer that everyone wants to hear. Everyone, folks like to hear that they're going to get cleanup and they're going to get it fast, but we want to make people aware that there are steps that they can take kind of in the interim that really are effective.
So you said you were going to have another meeting in August. What would you anticipate telling people at that meeting that you didn't tell them today? Because I've been to all these meetings and I don't feel like I get a whole lot of new information.
Certainly, yeah, and we recognize our process is a little bit on the slower side sometimes. Ideally, we'd have a final RIFS and HHRA to talk about in the next meeting. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that would be our goal. And if we don't have those documents finalized by then, we are going to schedule a meeting specifically to start talking about those finalized documents when they are final. But again, we're just trying to continually stay engaged for folks that haven't been to every meeting and may just be finding out about the site, after this meeting or in the interim. So, they are kind of getting, the information as well.
Can I address that as well? This is Casey. I think if there are specific questions you'd like to see folks address at those next meetings, I mean, to the extent you feel like you're hearing the same thing, please, please, please email those questions so that the team can know to answer, what are you not hearing? What's the information you're not getting? And then if you have ways that you think are good for the state or EPA to be communicating with folks, Sandy and George just both talked about, staying in touch with the county commissioners. I think whatever suggestions you have like that are really, get this information on the county websites or, in the Clear Creek Current or whatever it is, just please pass those on to the team. And then the thing that I'm hearing is, a lot of the same questions do come up. And I think, I'm a big fan of a good FAQ type page, frequently asked questions, because we really need to have that, things like, what can I do with my garden? I mean, they're easily answered. There are answers to that. And we need to have a really good website, because most people aren't going to show up to a community meeting like this. So those are some of my takeaways. I mean, this is a hard process and it's never moves as quickly as anyone wants it to. But I will say, when I was in a different capacity working on these issues like 8 years ago, the answer I got from the state is like, oh, we're a long ways away from even getting to this point. So there is, I'm glad we are here. I'm glad that there's an RIFS that's going to be finalized, that cleanup that's really going to be happening. So it's not the best answer, but there is progress, and I'm really glad to see that, because that was not the case several years ago. There weren't the resources and that sort of thing. But please communicate your questions. Let's see if we can work on a really good FAQ page where you don't have to attend a community meeting to get these answers. Those are just some things that come to my mind. Thanks.
No, thanks for that input, Casey. Definitely take that back to the team.
I'd also really echo Commissioner Marlin's statements, like the answers to the questions that come in. I'm also interested in knowing those answers. And so if you could share those with the folks who have attended today, not just the county governments, but also the citizens directly, I think would be really useful.
Certainly.
Are you on the list? The listserv? Okay, perfect. Just
Yeah,
wanted
that's
to
a good
make
point.
sure.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's something that had slipped my mind. But yes, we do. For folks that aren't aware, we do have a mailing list that you can sign up for on the CDPHE's Clear Creek website.
It might be worth too, I don't know, someone's taking meeting minutes or, having all the questions and then the answers linked on your website as well from each of the meetings that you're holding.
All great suggestions. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, this is Susan again. So Kyle, I was just going to submit my questions via email. Is there a public forum to submit my questions so that everybody gets the answers to my questions, or how does that, what's the mechanism? I think it was Commissioner Marlin, my apologies. you had asked to make sure that the answers to my questions be publicly available. What's that mechanism?
So off the top of my head, I think we would make them available on the site websites. Because outside and potentially the mailing list, would be the the three ways I could think of right now that we have established to get those communications out.
But asking those questions, Susan, yeah, you'll just email Kyle and I them, and then we can get them out to everybody.
Good.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to remind you guys that, whenever you do figure out what you want to do, whether it's cap and removal, whatever, that we're still interested in talking to you about the removal. And then that way that you and the county and the cities, could recoup on some of that cost also.
And just to, for the benefit of the group and, myself, you guys do reprocessing, correct?
We have, the mill locked down and, we have letters of intent with the local mills and the area and all the way out into Leadville even to where we can haul it all down there, they process it, and you get some of your money back.
Yeah, and that's definitely something to for us to consider, and appreciate you bringing that up.
I just have a couple quick questions. We talked earlier about the whole county is not blanketed with this Superfund name, and that we should be able to, I'm thinking about some parcels that the county owns that could be used for something to help our community. And doing the phase 1 or phase 2, can we do that? Are we still, I know we talked about it in the beginning, Charles, and how does that work? I mean, if we do a phase 1 and phase 2 and they come back clean, is that property out from under the Superfund blanket or no?
So what I would say is that, with especially the phase 2 data, we could, have, a conversation with you about what your redevelopment would look like for that property.
Okay.
Phase 1 does help. I think we talked a little bit
Yeah.
ahead of the meeting that, for instances where you already own the property, it will give you information, but it doesn't give you all of, like the liability protection, that comes with doing it, pre-purchase. So while there are benefits to doing the phase 1 now, really what we would suggest, and we can talk more offline about this, is potentially doing a phase 2 to get some some sample data. It sounded like you wanted to.
Oh, I was just going to say, Beth, just because you have specific properties that you have in mind, that it would be best just to, that we can take those offline and we can continue that discussion and really get more detailed information about them once we get the parcel numbers and can talk to you about that kind of stuff with it.
The reason stuff like that has to be done offline instead of it being publicly available, so people can just look, just like I can go into the county GIS and look at every single property and who owns it, that there's not just an overlay.
Well, not necessarily, other than her privacy, and also that it takes up meeting time that we could be using to answer other questions.
It should just be a downloadable layer, GIS layer on your site.
Right, yeah, and so right now, I don't think we have that type of resource. We don't have a map that shows every single mining impact across the watershed. It's just not something that we have available.
But do you have something?
We do have resources.
It's been going on for like 150 years, right? I mean, EPA hasn't been that long, but all the previous stuff should be layered.
Yeah, so we do have resources available for the previous work that we've completed, and we can make those available, certainly. So that is something that I have access to, kind of in turn, like if you're looking for like the arc map layers, like the GIS layers, that's what I have. And so that's something that I could provide to you.
Do I have to do a freedom of information request for that?
I think that could be as simple as an email.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, each on CDPHE and EPA's website, there is a documents tab on there, and if you go to that documents tab, you'll see all of those documents listed there. And I know it's not an overlay.
Nationally, that spends all of their time trying to take all the obfuscated information that's stuck into PDF documents and extract it so it's actually usable by people.
Yeah.
And I'm not accusing you specifically of this, but many government agencies make actually getting the information as impossible as they can. Instead of just sharing it as an ASCII CSV table or a shapefile or a KML, in which the data already existed to generate the map that was stuck in the PDF.
Yeah.
My last question, I live here in Georgetown and there's a big mine right behind my house and they just built $6 million homes right on top. And how did they do that? I mean,
They didn't talk to us.
I mean-
So one of the things about the Superfund process is it can be hard for us sometimes to be proactive. A lot of the work that we do is retroactive.
Yeah.
And so if you find out that there were potential, impacts due to that development, it's something that we can look at, through this OU5 process, and we can look at, but without, having that engagement, prior to, it's hard for us.
Does that make it liable? I mean, does the developer not have to go through some kind of, is the developer liable? I mean-
So it depends. Again, it gets back to the question that Commissioner Marlin had brought up, and I think Susan also brought up. There is EPA enforcement discretion policy, but it does have a stopping point, right? Like if there are, we use terms like exacerbate known contamination, which all that means is, you come in, you muck stuff up and you make it worse than it was before. It's possible that those developers developed those properties in a way that was safe and protective of human health, but we wouldn't know until we went out and collected some data. So that's where we would get involved.
I think I have some quick.
Wait, so Susan still has her hand up. I just wanted to make sure
apologies.
that.
We won't keep you here all night.
No, it's okay. This is what we're here for.
Susan, did you have another question or is it?
Yeah, I think everybody else has kind of asked the question I was asking, but with one other. So in the interim between the time that we define, or EPA, CDPHE defines mine impacted land that might be encompassed by OU5, for people who want to buy property, and also in the interim between the time that you guys make a decision on whether or not you're going to have the regulatory discretion to not make responsible parties out of single family homes, is there a comfort letter available for prospective purchasers outside of an AOC or a settlement agreement? My problem is going to be, in all honesty, in people wanting to buy land in the interim between when these definitions are made or these policy statements are made public. Are there comfort levels? Is there something available where people can, on the residential side, not the commercial side, buy land? I'm trying to to massage that transaction, if you will.
Yeah, before I answer that, it sounds like, or looks like Jamie might want to hop in.
Sure.
Hey, me again. I was just going to say, I think we can take that question back and try to come back to the next meeting with some kind of like more specific guidance from our Office of Regional Counsel. I know we have a couple of attorneys who are very specifically trained in that enforcement policy. And so I think if we could note that one, include that one in your questions to us, Susan, and we will definitely commit to coming to the next meeting with some answers on that.
Sounds great. Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, I don't want to try to play a lawyer, even though I would love to.
Will do.
I will say I toured a housing development in Colorado Springs at a conference that was built on top of a Superfund site. And there were probably 100 plus homes there. So maybe putting out some of the success stories and just showing us what can be done, because some of us have seen it, some of us haven't, but you hear Superfund site and you just, sorry.
I was gonna say, that's actually a really good point, because when it really comes down to it, the solutions to addressing this contamination are pretty straightforward. They're the same sort of solutions that I discussed in the slide with the feasibility study. You look at removal, capping, or some sort of treatment, and there's definitely ways that it can be done cost effectively and still minimize that exposure. So that's a really good point and something that we'll definitely look at providing more resources
Yeah,
about.
the messaging, focusing on that remediation
Brownfield
piece
is doing
and where we're going to be, because obviously all of us want this to be remediated and kept and whatever needs to happen. I think it's just, what do we do between now and when it's all taken care of? And so maybe really pushing that positive message of this is all getting taken care of. And showing some of those other good stories of other projects that have been really successful.
I hate to constantly keep pushing you towards the EPA website. At this point,
All there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, we do.
When you put together, if you put together a messaging package for us,
Mhm.
have some of those links in there so we can distribute that.
That's excellent feedback. Yeah, because it's also important to remember that that is part of the goal of Superfund, is to put and to take that contaminated land back into reuse. So, I mean, that is one of our goals, as is community involvement. So, which is, one of the big things. So that's an excellent point, and we'll definitely make sure we take that back.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really clear. We've been a development desert for a long time, in part because of the mining impacts, not because of the EPA's work, but because of the actions of people 150 years ago. And it's really clear we're gonna be healthier at the end of this, and it's just anxious right now. So a couple of things that I want to ask about how things have changed since OU5 started. I believe that the EPA reduced its lead tolerance level.
Yeah, so that was
Stream. Is OU5 going to design for that level or the increased level?
So I think you're talking about the updated lead policy that came out, and that policy focused largely on screening levels. And Caitlin did talk a little bit about screening levels in the presentation, but those are essentially the initial values that we look at, and so they're far more conservative. And with the updated lead policy, it also has us looking at like additional sources of lead. And so that is one of the things that has changed since we started this process, is that lead policy has come out. We did instruct our consultant CDM Smith to evaluate the site based on that updated lead policy guidance and those more conservative screening values.
And when you say screening values, that's like, if it's above this value, then you guys get interested and do more testing.
Exactly.
And I think, Caitlin, if you had something to add there.
Yeah, and I will say, yes, it mostly affected our screening values, but it also did affect our target blood lead level. And so we will be running both scenarios for a lower blood lead level as well. So when we're developing the human health risk assessment, so it did lower what EPA considered a healthy blood lead level. So it did lower the first screening level, which honestly we were already surpassing the old screening level plenty. But when we do evaluate it in the risk assessment, we are looking at that more stringent level now.
Okay, thank you. And then another thing that has changed is the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which I believe has a dedicated tax for the Superfund, which used to rely on general fund transfers that never happened. This is one of my big concerns a couple of years ago, was that there's no money, right? How is that account looking? Is there money now? How does the money available compare to the amount of work that you're thinking might?
So those are great questions. The site does have settlement dollars available for this work, and so those dollars will be spent first. And then if additional cleanup is needed, we'll be accessing dollars through the federal Superfund. And that's where my expertise ends. And if anyone from EPA wants to step in and help me out.
I knew you were going to throw this one to me, Kai. We at this point, we are happy for the Clear Creek site that we do have a pretty large settlement from the Tronox settlement to get going on the work. We think it'll get us going into cleanup, get quite a few properties cleaned up, and then we'll have to kind of queue along with all the other new starts for construction in the country. That's the way Superfund works. In order to access those federal dollars, we have what we call the priority panel, where a site team would put together a presentation that is then given to the priority panel for kind of ranking and distribution and prioritization of the sites and where the federal dollars can go to. With the change to how we are getting money through Superfund, we used to, as Commissioner Moreland pointed out, get appropriated dollars. So Congress would write in Superfund site money into the budget. Now this year we are in kind of a mix of tax and also a smaller appropriation. And so we don't really know what moving forward that's exactly going to look like. We're pretty confident that it's going to kind of be similar to what we've seen in the past. But at this point, we don't have a really, or at least at my level, I don't have a granular detail, but I can also take that back to our budget folks and note that as a question, Commissioner Marlin, and we can try to answer that one at the next meeting as well.
Thank you. Last one. Thank you. Do you have a guess? These are the questions you love. What the interim ROD, which I really welcome because this is early action and you're going to get to work. Have a guess for like the percentage of the scope that will be in the interim ROD?
Yeah, so when you read our focus feasibility study and you read the record of decision, a lot of that language has to do with the piles that were identified in the 2020 or 2018 sampling, but we'll extrapolate those cleanup levels to the piles that we also sampled, in these most recent efforts. Does that answer your question?
I mean, I would hesitate to say 30 or 40 or give a number as well.
Oh, so right now we had, I believe it was either 8 or 10 piles identified as part of that initial sampling that that work is focused on. And then I would conservatively say that there's probably maybe 20% of the piles that we sampled would also fall into that category. But again, just conservatively. Yep. Good.
We had talked about this at the last meeting, but if you have one of those sites on your, the residents, are you going to be doing any testing on the people, blood testing like you did in the early 90s?
Right now, we don't have a process established through Superfund to do the blood testing. We are trying to work closely with the county health departments to provide resources so they could do that testing, including blood testing machines, the test strips that they use, and then potentially some additional funding to help support their staffing needs and so on and so forth. And those conversations are we're actively working on setting up those processes.
And then I have a follow-up for you because my son was one of them that tested high back in the 90s and you told me to get in contact with you. So I talked to some other people that had their children tested at the same time. And one of the things that it ended up being was their bathtubs.
Yeah, and so I've seen many strange sources of lead in my work at this site and specifically the California Gold Superfund site. A lot of them end up being food related, strangely enough. There are Mexican candies that are high in lead. There are margarita rim toppers that can be high in lead. So there are those strange sources out there. And yeah, knowing that the bathtubs are one of them is, a good way to provide education and, let folks know about,
Yeah, so it's claw bathtubs that a lot of the old houses have.
Yeah, that's a new one for me. I did not know because obviously you hear about like
it happen in the
pipes
glaze sometimes of the glaze of the ceramics sometimes has high lead in it.
It is, it's in the glaze right
Yeah.
now.
And the public health office you can schedule lead tests there right now. I don't know what the overall capacity is, but like I just scheduled for myself and my kids just to because they were offering it. And so they're trying to get the word out. And it sounds like Gilpin is their public health is doing the same thing.
You can make an appointment online. It's really easy. You just fill it out and a nurse will call you and let you know.
Okay.
But I know the public health is trying to get some help from the state and stuff like that because it's a lot of people to test. Yeah.
Yeah, Clear Creek County was able to take advantage of some grant funding during the pandemic to get their the blood lead testing machine and the test strips. Unfortunately, Gilpin County wasn't in the same position at the same time, but I'm in communication with the health director in Gilpin County, and we're trying to figure out a way to get them some funding to make those purchases.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So I just want to be respectful of everybody's time. It is 10 to 8. And so maybe we'll take one more question and then let everybody go home, and you can email your additional questions on to Kyle and Angela, and we'll try and get those answered for you. And then if new questions come up before the next meeting, we can address those at the next meeting as well. Thanks, everybody.
I'll maybe just register one, which is like, I'm thrilled to have my property sampled. I'm thrilled to have the results. I'm thrilled for the data to be public. I'm thrilled for it to be in an ArcGIS layer that can be searchable. I will be less thrilled if it takes 10 years for the project to get funded and remediated. And in the meantime, everybody can search my property and read what's in this letter, because that will be a challenge. And so I just want to register that as a comment more than anything.
Thank you. We definitely appreciate that feedback, and we acknowledge that those are some very valid concerns, and something that I personally, would have the same concerns with if I lived in the area and was in your situation. So, thanks for letting us know.
And I have one last thing, and I feel like this is kind of silly, but I mean, we have a lot of not only housing developments happening, but major commercial developments happening where the ground is being disturbed significantly through some major projects. And I know you've said you're specifically dealing with residential. Should we be concerned about these larger commercial developments? And I mean, it just seems like there's a lot happening in our county while this process is going on. And I guess I'm still wrapping my head around what those implications are for projects that are ongoing. And again, like, there's a lot of commercial development that is disturbing the ground in Port Windy County.
Certainly, yeah. And what I would say is, if those developments you're aware of impacting historical mining, areas, then certainly bring those to our attention. If the developer did their due diligence, they figured out that there wasn't, mine impacts to that area, then they can kind of proceed without, recommending that they engage with us. But certainly if they're developing in and around those known mining impacts, reach out to us. We can at least have a conversation, figure out what they know, and talk about next steps.
And I think Jen just posted a link to a good resource too, so.
Let me pull
in the
that up.
chat. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's just the property ownership and development fact sheet that we have on our website.
Perfect.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
So, yeah, first I want to thank everybody for their time and kind of hanging out with us as we continue to ask questions. I also appreciate the amount of questions everybody has. And we are working to develop FAQs. I mean, Casey kind of beat me to the punch, but I mean, that's why she's the regional administrator and I'm not. But, we are developing those FAQs. We are looking to answer these questions beforehand. And in the future, as we advertise the August meeting, we will send as part of that, hey, if you have a question that you want specifically answered, please send that forward. As we move forward in the process, that way we can provide specific updates as we move forward. If you've attended every meeting and there's a specific question, that way we can have answers to all the questions that were asked from the person not representing the developer. So Shelby, I know your name was Shelby on the
Susan. Yeah.
That were provided by Susan. That would be great, and that would, I think, move the conversation forward. And then we could also have that written responses available after. So we could say, hey, here's our response to meeting. Here's our written response on the website. Please check out FAQs. And then also, if you have additional questions 2 days from now, 3 days from now, here's where you can get them going. On that same note, if you do have a question 2 days from now, 3 days from now, 2 hours from now, please reach out to us and submit them to us. We will gather all these questions. We will post them on our website right now, and then we'll email out on that distro list, letting you know where the direct link is to those specific questions for this meeting. So if you're not on our distro list, let us know and we'll get you added very, very quickly. So thanks for everybody's time. Thanks for hanging out, everybody online. And we look forward to talking to you in August.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Good.